jump right in. We're about to go on a pretty wild ride through more than 1,000 years of English literature. Think of it as a high-speed tour, from the ancient epic of Beowulf all the way to the revolutionary novels of Virginia Woolf. So, how on earth do you cover a millennium of stories? Well, we're going to break it down into 6 major eras. We'll start way back with Old and Middle English, when the language was just being born. Then, boom, the Renaissance hits, a total explosion of genius. After that, things get a bit more, reasonable during the Age of Reason. But that calm doesn't last because the Romantics come along with all their passion and emotion. Next up, we'll dive into the huge, sprawling world of the Victorians and their incredible novels. And we'll finish up with the moderns, who basically decided to tear up the old rulebook and start fresh. Sound good? Let's go. Okay, so our story starts way, way back. We're not just talking about the first books, but the very creation of the English language. This is a time of epic poems and sagas, stuff that was spoken and sung for generations before anyone ever thought to write it down. And I've got to be honest with you, the English literature from this time, it basically starts in a language you wouldn't even recognize. It's practically a foreign tongue. You know the epic poem Beowulf? That was first a story told out loud, a performance passed from one person to another. The language itself is a huge wall to climb for modern readers, for sure. But man, if you can get over that wall, the power of those old stories is just incredible. Okay, check this out. On the left, that's a bit of Old English from King Alfred the Great. I mean, look at it. Swa klima hios ofallen. It looks nothing like the English we speak today, right? And then you see the modern translation on the right. It just goes to show you what a massive journey our language has been on since its Germanic roots. But then, something huge happens, the Norman conquest of 1066. The language starts to change, fast, soaking up all this French and Latin, and out of this new mix, this Middle English, we get our first real literary rock star, Geoffrey Chaucer. And when you read Chaucer, suddenly, you're like, hey, I kind of get this. It's not just that the words are more familiar. For the first time, you can actually hear a person, an author with a real voice and personality, not just some anonymous poet from long ago. That's a huge deal. All right, moving on. From those medieval foundations, we get a full-on explosion. I'm talking about the Renaissance. This is maybe the most famous period in all of English literature. You've got the printing press making books accessible, a rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman ideas, plus all the drama of the Protestant Reformation. It was an age of massive change, and all that energy just pours into the literature. It's a burst of creative genius we've hardly seen since. And who's at the center of this explosion? Well, one name dominates the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras. William Shakespeare, of course. His tragedies. I mean, think about Hamlet. They just gave us these lines that dig so deep into what it means to be human. He's wrestling with life, death, love, betrayal, the whole shebang. But don't pigeonhole him as just the tragedy guy. His comedies are just as brilliant. They're packed with witty wordplay, hilarious mix-ups, and tons of romance. It just shows his incredible range, right? He could capture the darkest parts of the human soul and the lightest, most joyful parts of falling in love. And then there are his history plays. He took real historical figures and just blew them up into these larger-than-life characters. Look at this description of Antony. His legs bestride the ocean. He's not just a guy. He's a giant, a force of nature. Shakespeare's language could turn history into myth right before your eyes. So while Shakespeare is owning the stage, there's this other, quieter revolution happening in poetry. It's the Jacobean period, and you've got this group of poets we now call the metaphysicals. And their whole deal was this thing called metaphysical wit. They wrote this super smart, complex poetry, and they loved to shock you by yoking together two totally different ideas with these wild comparisons. And the king of this style was John Donne. The man was a genius at it. His poems are filled with these mind-bending comparisons. He'd pull from science, from religion, from philosophy, all to talk about love or God. I mean, come on, comparing lovers to the two legs of a drawing compass? It sounds crazy, but when you read it, it's absolutely brilliant. It just works. Okay, so after all that passion and chaos of the Renaissance, not to mention a whole civil war, the cultural pendulum just swings completely in the other direction. Welcome to the late 17th and early 18th centuries. We call this the Restoration period, or the Age of Reason, and it's all about order, logic, and a really sharp, biting sense of humor, usually aimed squarely at the powerful. The big name here, especially in what's called the Age of Dryden, is, well, John Dryden. He perfected this poetic form called the heroic couplet, two rhyming lines in a row, and he used it like a weapon to create these razor-sharp satirical portraits of politicians. This quote here, it's a total takedown of one of his rivals. It's just devastatingly clever. And if you thought Dryden was sharp, the next generation star, Alexander Pope, took it to a whole other level. This is the Age of Pope, and he was the undisputed master of the heroic couplet. This description of his rival, it is a masterclass in literary takedowns. Willing to wound and yet afraid to strike. Ouch. Pope could dissect someone's personality with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. So you've got all this order, all this logic, all this witty satire, but you know what? It couldn't last. A rebellion was starting to bubble up. A full-blown literary revolution was on the way, one that was going to throw out all that emphasis on society and reason and instead celebrate powerful emotions, the individual, and the beauty of nature. The Romantics basically asked, what happens when reason just isn't enough? See, they were reacting against what they saw as the cold, sterile logic of the Enlightenment and the grimy, dehumanizing reality of the Industrial Revolution. They believed that our feelings, our imaginations, our deep connection to the natural world, that was a kind of truth too, a truth that the Age of Reason had totally overlooked. And this is the key difference, right? It's a massive shift. We go from the witty banter of London coffeehouses to the wild, lonely landscapes of the human soul. The poet isn't just a clever social commentator anymore. Now, the poet is kind of a visionary, a prophet, diving deep into their own emotions and finding something epic in nature. And poets like Percy Bysshe Shelley just nail this feeling. When he writes, "Oh wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind?" He's not just talking about the weather. The wind is this powerful metaphor for change, for revolution, for hope. For the Romantics, nature was never just a pretty picture. It was alive, a powerful force you could connect with. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution keeps chugging along, and it completely changes Britain. You've got these huge, sprawling cities, incredible new fortunes being made, but also some really terrible poverty. And to make sense of this brand new, complicated world, a new kind of storytelling takes over. The great Victorian novel. And leading the charge were two absolute giants, Charles Dickens and William Makepeace Thackeray. Now, these guys were different. Just look at this breakdown. Dickens was like a rock star from day one, super famous, super popular. Thackeray, his genius took a little longer to be appreciated. And they wrote about different things. Dickens gave you the whole spectrum of society, from the richest to the poorest. Thackeray, on the other hand, was much more focused on the upper classes and their, well, complicated social rules. And that brings us to our final stop, the 20th century and the rise of modernism. After the trauma of World War I, with brand new ideas about psychology from people like Freud, the world just felt broken, fragmented. And that old-fashioned Victorian novel, with a neat beginning, middle, and end, it just didn't feel true anymore. It couldn't capture the messiness of modern life. So to try and capture this new, uncertain reality, modernist writers started experimenting like crazy. They invented brand new techniques, and one of the most famous is stream of consciousness. The idea was to write down a character's thoughts exactly as they happen, messy, jumping from one thing to another, totally nonlinear, just like how our own minds work, right? And Virginia Woolf, she was an absolute pioneer of this style. She believed that the real story, the real truth of a person's life, wasn't in the big, dramatic things that happened to them. No, she said it was in the small, fleeting moments inside their own head. Those little thoughts and feelings, that's where reality really was. So, there you have it. From poems being chanted in mead halls to novels that exist almost entirely inside someone's mind. What a journey, huh? It really shows you that literature is never static. It's always changing, always adapting to try and capture what it feels like to be alive. This 1,000-year story proves just how powerful language is. Which just leaves one big question, doesn't it?